Hi everyone, welcome to MedTech Mondays. And for those who haven't joined us before, the idea of today's session is just a really informal conversation with some industry experts around design for manufacturing, a chance for everyone to ask lots of questions, be really involved, be really active. So really looking forward to this. Design for manufacturing is a subject that I'm really passionate about. So I hope everyone finds it really useful. Before we get going, I'll just do a really quick introduction into what MDPP does. I think many of you will already know if you've been to any of the other MedTech Monday events that we've done previously. But I'll just start with our vision. So the vision of the Medical Device Partnering Program is that we help Australia to become the fastest in the world at taking a medical device and turning it into a product on the market. And one of the common issues that we hear is people saying that they need money. So one of the things that we look to do is that we help people to bring their ideas to life. We provide them access to experts, such as today. We make sure that their idea is fit for purpose. We de-risk it as much as possible, and we help to connect them in with different opportunities. So common situation, people say we need money. Well, we actually say often you don't need money. What you need is some access to expertise and some help. So the MDPP offering is that people come to us with a medical device idea, submit it to our website, and we do, for successful applicants, 250 hours of product development or some sort of technical work. That can be a small user trial, and we do a 30-hour market report, which gives some market feedback. And all of that's for $5,000. We have a really simple IP policy in that we don't take any IP. That's all belongs to the applicant or the client of the MDPP. We also work really closely with some of the manufacturers and the hospitals and the patent attorneys to try and help to connect and be able to provide advice. So we're really keen that people build a really good end user feedback base to begin from. And we also connect people in with future funding opportunities. So whether that's accelerating commercialization or local, state or federal grants, we help to connect people in with those as well. So I won't talk through this. That's our application process. I won't talk through it. But if anyone's interested in learning any more, please do contact me and I'm happy to go through it in more detail. So that's all from me. So my name's Stephen. I'm the Innovations Manager with the Medical Device Partnering Program. And what I'll do, we've got three panelists with us here today as well. So I'm just going to start with Anthony. So if you'd like to introduce yourself, what you do and who you work for, and I'll start the timer. And I've already explained to everyone that the timer very rarely actually works, but we'll see how we go.
Well, I nearly failed because I think I clicked the wrong link at the start, but I managed to get myself displayed on the screen in the nick of time. Hi everyone, I'm Anthony Skeats. I'm the engineering manager of MicroX. I'm a mechanical engineer. I've been working in product development for over 23 years. I started life working in the telecom sector and then came to Australia in 2006 where I worked for engineering consultancies Invitech and Hydrix. So I've had a lot of experience doing end-to-end product development for a lot of large companies as a result, companies like Coca-Cola and Philips, in the medtech space, in the fast-moving consumer goods and in consumer durables. I now run all the engineering operations and product development at MicroX in Tonsley. We're a startup. We started really in 2014 and we built our manufacturing plant in 2015 in Tonsley. I now have a team of well over 40 engineers and scientists, and we're growing at a rapid rate. And what do? We have basically a novel disruptive technology in the X-ray space. So we've invented the carbon nanotube cold cathode field emitter, which essentially is an LED version of an X-ray filament, and we can turn it on and off very quickly, electronically control it, and it's also very small. So our business is focused on actually taking that technology and turning it into products and solutions for our customers in the medical and security space. But in addition, because it is a disruptive new technology, I can't make it anywhere else. We're the only people in the world that can make it, in fact. So we have an internal business which is focused in R&D and also core technology, component development and process development. So again, full end-to-end design for manufacture. today I'm hoping that I can answer some of your questions and passed on some of the things that I've learned during my career, and hopefully guide you in a successful journey yourself.
Great, thanks, Anthony. Yeah, we've almost made it to a minute on the clock and then it stopped. So there you go. We'll see if we can do any better this time. Over to you, Shay.
Hi, everybody. I'm Shay Chalmers. I am Director at Strategic Engineering Australia, which is an engineering consulting firm that helps businesses across the country establish and optimize their manufacturing processes. As far as background, I'm also a mechanical engineer. I've worked across the world and across a number of different industries, but always in the manufacturing space, from steel to medical devices. I guess the relevant different, these days I'm also partner at a medical device commercialization firm, Ontogo. And what we do is we work with businesses to bring their innovation to life. And my part in that business is to really support the manufacturing side of it and ensuring that we integrate design for manufacture at the right stage in the product life cycle so that we can make the transition to manufacture as cost effective, simple and efficient as possible. So that's me in 45 seconds.
Thanks, Shay. And the clock's still running. Johnathon, over to you next.
Thank you. Thanks for the opportunity to talk on the panel today. My name is Johnathon Choi. I'm the founder of INNOVAMED. We're a Sydney-based medical device consultancy, and we specialize in the product development, verification testing, and manufacturing solutions. I think we're finding a common theme here. I do have a degree in biomedical engineering, but I too am a mechanical engineer by trade. And I've been working in the medical device industry for about 18 years now. Our client base spans the startups and SMEs across a broad discipline of emerging technologies in the areas of orthopedics, cardiovascular, urology, ENT, and wearable devices. We also work in close partnership and collaborate with research universities and research hospitals, both here in Australia and abroad. And a little bit more about my personal experience. I've worked across various disciplines in the industry, in engineering, manufacturing, quality, intellectual property, and business development. And aside from my daily gig in INNOVAMED, I'm also currently the medical device director at our partnering company, Romar Engineering, whom some of you may know. They are a reputable contract manufacturing company based in Sydney. And that's it for me.
And we mentioned I've worked with Romar before in a previous role because I'm also a mechanical engineer originally. But yeah.
Thank you.
Okay. Great. All right. Thanks so much, everyone, for the introduction. So just before we get started on the questions, just a reminder, so everyone should be able to see questions come in. I think you should be able to upvote them, hopefully. If not, please do just submit any questions that you'd like to have asked to the panel, and we'll get answers for you. So we've got one question to start off with, but before we start, I will stop sharing my screen so you can see everyone's faces nice and big. So the first question we've got here, and maybe we'll start with just randomly Shay. When should I think everyone's going to want to answer this one anyway, but when should I start thinking about design for manufacture or design for assembly?
Well, you're asking a manufacturing engineer, so very early, it's the first thing. But I think in reality, it really depends on your project. When you're going through the active product design, establishing user requirements, and going through the verification, validation, and transfer to manufacture, you're juggling so many priorities. So it is a challenge to focus on what do my processes look like? How do they scale? How do I incorporate design elements into it that actually will support in my manufacturing transfer? I think as early as possible is generally the answer, but understanding that in practical reality, that can be really challenging. What I would recommend though, is that we've got a really fabulous manufacturing ecosystem here in Australia. And one thing that you can do through partnering very early and understanding the manufacturing requirements, you can start to inject that expertise into your product design without having the expertise in-house. I've worked with Romar as well on a number of different projects, but it's really helpful working with contract manufacturers like Romar to get an understanding of the design decisions that you're making and what impact that may have on molding down the line or extrusion or whatever the manufacturing process that you're looking at. there's a lot of expertise that you can support and work together and partner with, which is one of the benefits of staying onshore here in Australia. So I might leave it there.
Thanks, Shay. Anyone else want to add anything else?
I'd just like to echo the same sentiments as Shay, but I think it's very important that an engineer considers design for manufacturing at the early architectural phase. In fact, it's really a business decision. Early on in my career, I used to think, when is the right time to bring manufacturing in? And there'd be several arguments around, well, you know, they're much better once an idea is down on paper. Manufacturing isn't just about making things and making it easy to make things. It's about making the right decisions for your business. Engineers have to do that. We have to show commercial acumen in our day-to-day decision making. An architectural decision on how you solve something can drive product, the length of time it takes to get to market, for example, or it can limit your ability to be agile and change the direction your product takes as you learn more from your customer in the early phases of development. So understanding how things are made and getting people involved who know how to make them, they're the ones that have to live and breathe making it day in, day out at the very early architectural phase is crucial, I think.
Isn't it funny that really when you've got your processes right, everything's profit on top? So while I used to work in a role helping with current products, and we were really focused on saving this was in the UK, so every penny that we could was really, because it was a fairly high volume product, is really useful. So when you're actually selling it and you're looking at the numbers, you think, oh, if we can get this down by 5p, whatever it is, per unit, that's a huge amount of money. So you think about it when your product's selling, but you don't necessarily think about it in the same way beforehand.
Yeah, like in some of the fast-moving consumer goods I've worked in, we operate to the 4th decimal place in cost. Yeah. So we're even looking at additives in plastics to see whether it's viable or not from a value engineering perspective. But it's cost is one very important factor, of course, for business success. But it's important that you get to market quickly. It doesn't take forever. And you get products out there and you learn a little bit about them, particularly in the disruptive technology space, before you commit expensive tooling and you kind of get locked in and you start driving yourself down that pathway of the lowest possible cost or the highest throughput. There's some really amazing techniques that you can use nowadays to actually make products without committing to tooling and save yourself 20 or 30 weeks of lead time, for example, if you architect it correctly.
Great, thanks. So maybe I might just jump quickly ahead and it's a bit self-indulgent, but there's a quick MDPP question, so I'll just quickly answer it. So Pierre asked, 250 hours of product development is a lot of value for $5,000. It sounds like someone's advertising for us. Who actually does these hours? So yeah, maybe I should explain. So the MDPP is funded through both the state and the federal government to be able to provide the hours that we do. So that's heavily subsidised by the funding that we receive. So professional staff at the Flinders University, which is where we're based, so within the Medical Device Research Institute, typically we have our own engineers, so typically we use them, but sometimes if it's a project that fits better with a researcher, we sometimes use them. Sometimes we use external people if we don't have the capabilities in-house, but all professional staff that complete those projects. Anyway, so we'll go back on to talk about everyone else, but thanks a lot for that question. So is design for manufacture different in medical devices to other sectors? So Jonathan, we haven't heard from you yet. Maybe we'll go to you.
I don't know. To me, I think design for manufacturing, irrespective of the industry, I think applies much the same. If there is a subtle difference between the medical device industry and other industries, for example, like the consumer industry, because the whole industry is very risk averse and risk-based approach to everything you do in terms of design, manufacturing, and usability, I do find that there is a heavy emphasis on doing a good risk assessment up front. And I think part of doing that whole risk assessment is getting all the people from design, manufacturing, clinical, everybody involved as early as possible in the design and development phase. So I think that's probably the fundamental difference between the design for manufacturing with medical device and other industries, in that you're getting everybody involved as early as possible in the piece.
I think, can I just jump in too and lead on from that? Once you're in market, one of the challenges with med devices that you don't face in other industries is the regulatory framework that you need to operate within. And once you're in market, it is incredibly difficult to go from, say, a manual process, which you may not understand all of the aspects of the variables and the parameters, to an automated process. And I've been on that journey before, and it's incredibly difficult. So if I can give some advice for when you're starting out, design it with the future in mind. So although you might not be automating at the very beginning, it's really important to think of it as a scaled approach. So instead of perhaps doing something by hand, for instance, you might be able to, with great difficulty, injection mold a component by hand, but controlling pressures and temperatures are not able to be done. So you actually don't know the magic that went into you making that particular component by hand. But instead, you might not be able to afford tooling and automation at that exact moment, but thinking about how you control the process and design the process from a manufacturing perspective to understand exactly how it works. And it might be creating a jig in a controlled temperature environment under controlled pressures so that you can actually replicate that process and product in a way that's scalable. I see that mistake all the time, even though it's difficult to think about it at the beginning. Design the product and the process with the future manufacturing in mind, and you'll save yourself a lot of heartache.
I think Micro-X is probably a really good example of a company that were really well set up to be able to scale their manufacturing really quickly. I remember going down to visit you probably 4 or 5 years ago, having all the ex-Holden manufacturing methods in place to be able to scale your assembly and manufacturing really quickly.
Yeah, look, it's interesting, taking experiments and then turning them into production processes, and then actually scaling those into actually proper high mass throughput production processes is not trivial. And Shay's spot on. You do need to give some thought to the end game right up front, and because otherwise you'll design something in there that you just can't make, or it's just too difficult to scale and it becomes a choke point. I'm a bit of having worked in multiple industry sectors, I'm a fan of the term good manufacturing practice. And the difference in medical devices is that it's kind of mandated that you must follow it, which kind of is weird, because I think everybody should follow it in every sector, frankly. And people don't, because they can get away with it and they think they can cut corners, and generally they get their fingers burnt. The core tenets really is very, very simple. It's all about building in quality in your process. And if you have that mindset from day one, and then you can start planning how you're going to eventually scale up with built-in quality. You can consider your design and then your manufacturing process, and then how you're going to scale that manufacturing process as you go. And you make investment decisions on the way, which are less riskier to make commercially, because you've built in quality and you're confident in what you're doing. And yes, when it comes to making changes in the medical space, it can be quite expensive. It's not impossible, right? It's not like I've heard in the past people say, oh, once we've got this in production, we can never change it. That's not what good manufacturing practice is about. But it can be quite expensive to change it if you have to go through recertification. So it's important that you really understand the basic principles of that, and you design it from day one.
Right, and I think maybe this leads into Youssef's question, which is, he's still a university student, but he wants to know if manufacturing engineers have to go through the different ISO standards when considering a design, or is that another team who go through the verification validation process for a medical device? Anthony, we'll go to you on this one, I think.
Yeah, absolutely. Every engineer owns every regulatory and quality responsibility. You can't farm it off on somebody else. However, it is important, and in fact, from a manufacturing perspective, to build in quality. I mean, ISO 13485 exists for manufacturing in medical devices, right? You don't have to be compliant to it, but it's very useful, but it kind of tells you how to do your job. Now, within that, of course, there may be, there's a big focus on safety, effective safety and intended use of devices for med products. So the 60601 safety standard is something that engineers need to live and breathe every day. They need to be aware of it in their decision making. If you're a mechanical engineer, you don't need to understand necessarily the nuances of pre-bridging clearance for electrical breakdown, for example. People within their discipline tend to become experts in those areas, but there is the quality team are there to help make sure they police the development and manufacturing teams, if you like, to make sure they remain compliant and stick to the process that's been approved. The actual work is all done by the engineers themselves.
The quality engineers do hate being called the police, but unfortunately they do a very good job of keeping us all in line. I remember when I was in the steel industry in the US, and we followed good manufacturing practices, but when I moved back to Australia and joined in a multinational medical device company, I remember thinking the same thing, Yusuf, about like quality systems in 13485 and every regulatory and quality process that you need to learn and breathe and understand. And I was in the production engineering department at this time. And I actually sat down the first 6 months of my employment, read, I think it was close to about 15,000 quality documents that were within our quality management system. Because I was like, I'm going to get this. I'm going to know what this 13485 is all about and how every product that we've ever made got onto the market. And I tell you what, like it was one of the most, it sounds dull and boring, but it was one of the most like influential parts of my career, because once you understand the intricacies of a quality management system, you can understand how to drive change. You can understand how to continuously improve and what are those elements that are risky, or how the risk management systems work as well. So quality systems are a blessing for a new engineer because it gives you the opportunity to read the entire history of a device, even if it was made and designed 20 years ago.
Great, thank you. Maybe we'll move on to another question. We'll come to you, Jonathan. So we'll go for the next one at the top. So is it better to invest in, and we've sort of already covered this a little bit, but is it better to invest in complex jigs, fixtures and toolings, or simplify the design?
Oh, sorry, do you mean, in other words, to invest in the jigs for manufacturing? I think that's what the question's around.
Yeah, I think so.
Yeah, I think, it kind of depends on what you're manufacturing and what the process involves. For example, if it's quite a straightforward component where it's just literally injection molding a component basically in its finished form, then I suppose there's no real need for complex jigs and fixtures. But if you're looking at a process where a lot of the devices require assembly work and things need to be glued or assembled together, it is definitely good to have to invest in some type of jigs and fixtures to help mitigate the risk of having a fault down the line. So it helps standardize the process for assembling and improve the quality of what comes out at the end of the process. So yes, I agree. It's a case by case thing. I think it depends on what you're actually manufacturing and how it's manufactured. I think it's good to look at ways to make the process more consistent and produce safe products.
Everyone happy with that? Nothing else?
I have an issue with the word complex. Nothing should be complex. Everything should be simple. So jigs and fixtures are very useful. They don't need to be complex.
I always used to joke that because I don't know if everyone else has the same experience, but I always found that you start off designing something and it looks really complicated and really impressive. And by the time you finish, it looks really simple and boring. And it looks like you could have come up with it in a couple of hours. But the complicated part was the bit that got you to the simple part.
If it looks complicated, it's going to be complicated to manufacture and build.
Yeah.
It's very simple.
Yeah, I'm all about trying to take the guesswork out of any process and to make it consistent. So that's where it all helps.
That's right. And you're better off designing fixtures than you are designing complexity into every part, where you're going to see a lot more variance in those parts just because of the nature you're building multiple.
Yeah.
Right. All right, we'll move on to the next question. So the panelists covered a little bit of this, risk assessment and quality. Are there any key tips that you'd recommend to keep manufacturing costs down? Maybe we'll go to Shay.
I missed the first part of that, Stephen. What was the first part of that question?
So basically, are there any key tips you'd recommend to keep manufacturing costs down? It didn't help that I muddled up.
That's okay. That's a really tough question without a lot of context. I guess there's a number of things you can do from a design perspective. Look at what raw materials you have available. I guess if you come back to what your design specifications are and you really spec that out quite well, One thing that I've seen done quite poorly time and time again is when you're trying to do your initial design specifications, if you keep them really tight, and rather than thinking, what are the different variables that I could have in order to make this device perform its intended function at the end, rather than saying it needs some ridiculous tolerance that's going to send your costs through the roof, if you keep it broad and you can utilize raw materials that are made on a commodity basis and not a specialized diameter that's required for your ridiculously overspec'd product, that's probably the biggest advice I can get, is ensure that your design, yes, with your customer needs in mind, but also put your design specs together based on what can realistically achieve your goals, and understanding what you can compromise, what are your non-negotiables, and what can you change. Because the more flexibility that you have in the design from a raw materials perspective, or even from a sizing or a fit or a tolerance, the tighter you get with these things, the more expensive things get. So it probably comes back to how you really spec out your product and give yourself the broadest range of selection of raw materials and processes.
Yeah, if I can just add to that, I think I like to sort of follow that philosophy of control what you have to, not what you can, because when you can really go overboard and try to implement as many controls and make the manufacturing process complex when it doesn't have to be. So again, I suppose it sort of leads into that risk assessment, taking a risk-based approach and looking at what you do need to control in the manufacturing process as opposed to what you can. And obviously, very early on in the stage, having that expertise or having somebody involved in the process of the design early on who has a thorough knowledge of the manufacturing processes and what is available, I think helps coming up with a design that is manufacturable.
So this guy, I guess it's a slight tangent, but it just made me think about, so one of the things that I remember learning early on was that you don't put so if you've got a whole bunch of screws put in, you don't have one set as M2.5 and one set as M3, and then when you're assembling it, it can be really easy to muddle them up. So you try and standardize as much as possible. But then that made me think as well about, so I think aircraft are a really good example of where if there's a crash, they go back and they look at designs and they make changes based on what they've learned, which most other industries don't do very well. But I remember there was one where the windshield of a plane was held in by bolts that were, I don't know, say 8 mil long. And someone was replacing them and they just hold them side by side to see if they looked about right, and picked one that was 1 mil or 2 mil short. And the window failed the next time the plane went out because it looked about right, but it actually wasn't quite right. But I think that's the kind of thing where if you leave yourself open to making those tiny little errors, it can actually be a big issue. Sorry, Anthony, I think I interrupted you. I think you were going to.
Oh, no. I mean, all the old adages are true. Less number of parts, standardization, keeping it all simple. I mean, it's a bit of a difficult question because there's so much that can influence manufacturing cost. You got to look at as well. Manufacturing cost is often a line item, and it's normally split into materials and labour, and a little bit of overhead on top. And people go, I get a bit grumpy about it. Oh, why am I spending so much on labour? I should try and design some hours out or something like that. But you've got to look at what the implications of that actually are in the bigger picture. I mean, a good example is the automotive industry, right? Where, design for assembly is super important. I went up to the Holden manufacturing plant before it shut down. A car's coming off every 90 seconds. They're building about 6 different varieties, and each one is configured differently. So it's quite a complex, automated and very labor intensive as well in certain areas, assembly line. But think of a car, right? So it's assembled really quickly and really efficiently. Then you need to go and service it. And I had a failed air conditioning unit in my, I won't name the car, but to service it, I had to remove the entire dashboard, right? It's ridiculous. So you might decide the best thing for your product actually is to have more labor or put more screws in, because then when you're in the field and you need to replace a part, so it depends a lot on the type of product you've got. And most of the manufacturing costs or the ongoing costs of products and your ability to drive cost out and get learning curve is based on architectural decisions that are made at the start of your development. And frequently I've seen product managers and marketing guys and, you know, customers saying, I want this and I want that, I want everything else, all the bells and whistles, and it gets designed in. And the poor manufacturing guy's got no option at the end. He's just got to build it because it's there, whether you need it or not. So I think getting people that are focused on the, if you like, the back end, the manufacturing, production, the service in the field and all that sort of stuff at the architectural phase. And when these decisions are being made, saying, well, you do realize that that is going to actually add 5% to the cost and we're not going to be able to do anything about it if you have that light in that position, for example. It's a very important conversation.
Great, thanks, Anthony. I'm going to jump back in and be self-indulgent again. We've got one more MDPP question. How does MDPP determine which ideas to incubate? So I just quickly say to that one, if you have whatever the idea is, you can always submit it through our website. So what we look at is whether there's a market need. So a lot of it comes down to the commercial side. It can vary a little bit depending on the project. So I'd say probably best just to get in touch and I'll talk you through it specifically for your need. We get people, so we sometimes will get a surgeon with something sticky taped together and an idea, and we can work with that, but sometimes it can be a bit more complicated. So yeah, if in doubt, just get in touch. That'd be my feedback. Maybe we'll come to, so Yusuf has another question. So how big in the medical device manufacturing sector is additive manufacturing? So perhaps we'll start with Shay on that one.
It's a really growing field, actually. Additive manufacturing in medical is interesting because there was a little bit of a challenge meeting some of the requirements around verification and validation of processes. But a number of businesses, even within Australia, have actually got regulatory approved additive manufactured medical devices. We've got Anatomics in Victoria that have been doing that for a very long time. In fact, I think Paul Durso, the founder, did his PhD in additive manufacturing through the Queensland Manufacturing Institute in 1990 or around those. So it's been happening for a long time, and there's a number of really strong players in the field globally. But it's still, it's interesting because I think if it's a medical device business and that then utilizes additive manufacturing as a methodology to deliver a part or a prototype or a supporting agent for a surgery, that's one thing. But where we've found, where I've seen at least there's challenges, is when it's an additive manufacturing foundation trying to apply that into medical. It's a really steep learning curve and very difficult to understand the validation that's required for your process. So that's been an interesting dynamic to watch during COVID. I think they've particularly, if you're don't have a strong quality system foundation and medical device understanding, it's actually quite a very steep learning curve. But if you are a med device manufacturer, most med device companies utilize additive manufacturing in some way, shape or form. Might not be for their finished product, but to assist in prototyping or to assist in creating anatomical models so that you can test your product or that kind of thing. So it's definitely growing, but it's got quite a niche market is my opinion, but happy to hear what the other guys think.
Because in theory, I guess additive manufacturing, medical should be a really good space for that, because my view is that additive manufacturing is great when it's something personalized and you're making lots of one-offs, but not many sectors do that quite so much. But actually medical is the perfect sector for that, and we have started to see more and more in, so yeah, like you say, Anatomics, and a lot of I worked in a company that did titanium dental implants. So I think medical should be the place to pick it up, but then the regulatory is a little bit behind, so it's quite difficult.
Yes and no. Like I was involved in, I worked with the world's first personalized medical device that was approved by the FDA. So, and that was, I think that was 15 years ago now. I might have that wrong, but it's been at least a decade. So it is a thing, and there is a regulatory pathway, but it's quite complex. You've got to really understand what your boundaries of your product are, and even though it's personalized, it's still got to have boundaries. So there's ways to do it, and I agree. I think medical is particularly in the personalized space, is a really good component, a really good contender to use additive manufacturing, but it is challenging from a regulatory perspective. Not impossible, but challenging.
Yeah, we use it. So we use it to make bits for our products. I haven't yet used it for a critical component, but I have used it for other components, which would have quite severe implications to the performance of our device if they were to break in the field. So the key challenge, and we use it a lot for prototyping, of course, and we use it a lot for making little fixtures on nests and ongoing production improvement fixtures and things like that, test pieces. But in our products, the key benefit really is that I have the ability to design in components. I can get them made more quickly. I can test them more quickly, and I can change them if I need to. So we don't make unique parts for people. It's a one product fits all. But the key challenge really has been around the quality of the materials. It's only really recently that I felt that the quality of the actual, particularly the plastics, getting to a level where they have the durability that you'd want in a product to last 10 years in the field. And there are some pretty good ones out there now with some nylons mixed with chopped Kevlar and carbon fiber, that sort of stuff. And we use them to manufacture some of the parts in our product. Some of the parts that we'd already tooled. And then we made changes, and it was so expensive to change the tool that we decided just to print them instead. And that's what we do.
Great. All right, maybe we'll move on to the next question. I think I'll come to you, Jonathan, on this one. As a startup, what are the most important things to consider before selecting a manufacturer or a contract manufacturer?
I think first of all, look at their ISO certification. I think that's an important one. But I think it's also good to talk to the manufacturer about past experiences and the types of products, materials, and the experience that they have had in the medical device manufacturing space. So if it's a company that, for example, if you're looking at manufacturing a new catheter and the company has no experience in extrusion, probably not the right manufacturer for you. But if you're doing some plastic or silicon injection molding of say bungs as an example, and a company like Romar I think is a good example that has a lot of experience in that space. So I think it's about looking and talking to the manufacturers about the types of products that they've made and the types of materials and experiences they have. And I think it's also good to have that. I mean, nowadays it's a bit more difficult to have the face-to-face with all the restrictions and all, but we can still Zoom. I think it's good to get to know your manufacturers, I think, and just do your homework. I think there are a select number of contract manufacturers even around Australia. I think go talk to the different ones and just see which one fits with you as well.
Shay, did you have anything to add to this, or have you seen any examples of people who've perhaps made mistakes in this area? And
yeah, I think Jonathan's point about asking them what they've done in the past is really, really important, because what often we see, particularly with manufacturers in Australia, they will say, yes, they can do it, and they can. But what people misunderstand is that putting a product into manufacturing is a design process, right? So if they haven't done that process before, there's a level of design work that needs to be done just to set up the process. And so sometimes there's a bit of a misunderstanding, I think, when people talk to contract manufacturers, because you ask them to do something and they say, yeah, we can do that. They have the capacity, they have the skills, they have the ability, but they still need to design that process, and particularly in medical, ensure that they've got all of their quality system boxes ticked. They've got to develop the procedures, they've got to understand all the inputs, the outputs, and then verify and validate that process. So that in itself is quite a body of work, and one that you have to pay for. And so I think what often happens is people will get a little bit annoyed at that fact and then go offshore because there's a perception that that's actually a cheaper option. But what often happens then is that you lose the ability to work with the manufacturer, not always, but the further away they are and the larger they are, the least they'll prioritize you and your needs for continuous improvement. So one of the problems that I've seen is when you go to a large player that is offshore, they'll downgrade your priority from a production perspective and also from a design and a continuous improvement perspective. Whereas if you're with somebody who's smaller and niche, it doesn't matter if it's in Australia or offshore, they tend to work more in a collaborative partnership way. So if your product is new, things will go wrong. The design will not be perfect. The raw materials will not be perfect. Your supply chains will break. That's just the reality of manufacturing. So making sure that you select a partner, a manufacturing partner who you can truly collaborate with. You understand who owns what IP, you understand who owns what registration as well. I've seen people get caught up in registration battles when they didn't realize that their partner actually owned some of the registrations for their product. So I think really looking at it from a partnership perspective is in your best interest, because they can support you to continually improve your product, to support your design, and they'll work with you to get your costs down as well. But if you don't have that partnership relationship, it's a supplier purchaser relationship, and it's very different. Sorry, that was probably a bit rambly.
Oh, no, that was perfect.
I think it's very important. The key thing I look for is I actually ask them what their purpose is. Why are they here? Because, you know, if it's aligned with what you're trying to do, then you're going to have a strong collaborative relationship. And what you're really looking for in a contract manufacturing environment is a strategic partner, not a supply relationship. That's old school thinking. In order for them to be successful, you have to be successful, and vice versa, right? So being open and collaborative and supportive, which you might get a better price if you go to a much larger provider. Maybe not. Maybe their overheads are really high. Who knows? So capability is important. They do need to have the experience and the capability in the field that you're in. But I'm more interested in their willingness to work collaboratively with what we're trying to achieve. And let's face it, you know, manufacturing investment is large, and the revenue doesn't come to a period of time after that called the sales cycle, which can be very long, right? So they're going to scale up, they're going to put resources in, and they're not going to receive any orders potentially for a period of time. So they're also taking risk. And it's important that you both are open about it and you work together.
Great, thanks for that. Just looking at the list of questions. So we have got, Pierre has asked whether Boothroyd, I hope I get this pronunciation right, Boothroyd Debust book is still the most up-to-date reference for product development engineers, or has anyone got any book recommendations? I'm not going to put
I read Boothroyd Dewhurst when I was at university. I think that was in 1994. So if it's still around, I reckon it's still a good book.
I was thinking the same. I'm like, what's in that book? I feel like from a foundational perspective, like when you're looking at design for assembly, it's one of those things that you're like, oh, it's so simple, but it makes so much sense. That's what I remember when I read it a long time ago, but that's been a while.
Any new book recommendations or not? No, just keep with the
there is so much information. One of the most important things in manufacturing, with our in-house manufacturing in particular, is people come and join our organization. They come fresh out of university. They've actually got some fresh learnings and new knowledge that we didn't have. So you've got to be open to receiving it. I mean, the old principles of manufacturing have been around since the Industrial Revolution 1.0, not 4.0. There's just things have changed along the way. You've got to stay relevant.
Yeah, that's a good point, Anthony, on the youngins and what they bring in, the graduates, and what they're bringing, like the digital natives and the understanding of systems and how we can optimize that. We have so much to learn.
Yeah, we've got a guy who actually joined our team from Flinders, and I actually gave him a job before he'd actually graduated, because he came in and did a work placement, and then he hung around and he just took it upon himself to analyze huge amounts of data that we've been collecting. And he came back about 3 weeks later and produced a report, the quality we've never seen before, and it took 6 hours out of our process.
Wow.
Yeah. No one in our team even thinks like that, right? So it's important to stay relevant.
All right, next question we've got is, when should I consider things like packaging and sterilization when designing a medical device? Jonathan, maybe we'll come to you on that one.
Yeah. I think when, obviously we try to do this in this particular order, but it never really happens. But, you know, before you even go about designing something, you always establish what your requirements are. And I know that never always happens. The requirements tend to sort of follow at some stage later on. But yes, it's important to establish what your product requirements are very early on in the design process. And that is when you want to look at the intended use, how it's going to be used, who your users are, because that will establish how you package and sterilize the product. So I think very early on is really the answer to me. But obviously, as the product matures and the design matures, you know, things change, and you might find that at the start you thought ethylene oxide was a good way to sterilize it and Tyvek was a good material for you, but you might find that changes over time, and that's fine. But I think setting the precedence up front early on is best.
And that risk-based approach too is a really good one, because it's when you're going through risk, whether the process is packaging, sterilization, assembly, or it actually doesn't matter. All of the processes are weighted equal until you do your risk, and then you understand what are the implications if my packaging fails. What are the implications if this particular element of my device is damaged during shipping? And if the risk is low, then you need to place less emphasis on it. But when you're doing process risk assessment and looking at how many ways I can kill a person, that's when you really need to categorize and tailor the activity that you do and the detail that you put into it based on the implication of if it fails or if something goes wrong.
One of the things we find with our program, people come with their idea for a medical device, and perhaps they've spoken to one clinician who might not be practicing at the moment, or at some point has been, but has been very senior. So they have an idea of how it would be used in the operating theatre, but actually sometimes you show it to a few clinicians who do it day to day, say a midwife or something, and they'll say, no, that's not how we do it. That wouldn't be useful. Like, I think part of the reason for in the medical device partnering program, why we try and connect people in with lots of clinicians right at the beginning is, you need to be thinking right from the beginning. Well, what is the most, how is this going to be used? What's the most practical use case? Did you have something to add to that, Anthony?
Well, packaging, right? And most people think of products, right, and the solutions the products make, and they forget how the product needs to get there. So then they go, oh, well, packaging is all about making it arrive safely and it's not broken.
Yeah.
I've always viewed the packaging as a part of the design you design up front. Think of this is experience really from the consumer space. The first moment of truth you get with anything, think of your iPhone, is the box. Right? That's what makes you most excited. If you've got to try and get a Stanley knife out to cut into this like really thick plastic blister pack, that like a packet of batteries or something, to try and get you a nice delicate phone out, you're going to be pretty cross. So the packaging design is crucial. It's a first moment of truth. It's usability. It's part of the product. You can't have the product without it. So I don't think it should be treated separately.
They've stopped doing it now, but it used to be that everything was wrapped in plastic, and you'd take it out and you'd spend the first 15 minutes unwrapping things.
I mean, the most durable, cheapest plastic you buy are those horrible blister packs that you got to weld together. No one can get into, right? Everyone slices their fingers off and goes to hospital.
But packaging can be a consumer-led decision as well. Like, I think one interesting example I was trying to eliminate for years because it was so inefficient was double packaging of a particular medical device in a particular region in one market. And we went out to all the product managers, talked to all of the clinicians, and they were like, no, we're not changing our process. We take one out, we unpack it one out here, and then the next one in here. And it was so inefficient. We had to sell this product at the same price as everybody else, but it was a whole nother pouch and a whole nother sealing process, and then a whole nother sterilization validation. And it didn't serve any functional purpose for us, but it was purely a user-based decision. So if you don't understand how your users want to use your product, your packaging directly can be impacted by that as well.
Perfect, thank you. So one more question, and we're getting close to the end of time now anyway. So Yusuf has asked another question saying, what's the best way for me to possibly start my medical device manufacturing journey? It all seems very overwhelming with so many variables at the moment. So I think this is a good question to finish up on. What would you recommend for people looking to get into manufacturing? I'm not sure who to start with. Johnathon, maybe?
Well, if I look at, if I take Romar as an example, Romar do take on a lot of interns from university, and I think, you can get lucky, you can get unlucky sometimes, but I think we've been quite fortunate, and a lot of the interns that have come out of places like UTS, Sydney Uni, New South Uni, we've had some really good students who've come on and stayed on for a very long time and matured through the process and then moved on to bigger and better things themselves. So I think it's, look at what options you have available. I mean, there are, like I said, it's like finding a contract manufacturer. You have contract manufacturers around Australia. Obviously, you want to pick a place that's a little bit more convenient for you to travel to, so somewhere a little bit local. But talk to the manufacturers and just see that the business is right for you too. if you're looking to get the foot in the door. I think the first step in the door, I think, is always the hardest, but once you get in, I think, you know, the experience then speaks for the rest of that.
I think the best thing is when you realise that not everyone knows everything already. So you always think when you leave uni and you go into your first job, you think that everyone already knows so much about all the different manufacturing processes. But I don't think anyone ever learns everything. No, there's such, like, if you feel overwhelmed now, just wait till you get into industry and you realise how much more there is to be overwhelmed by.
A bit harsh, Stephen. I wouldn't say overwhelmed. I think there's infinite opportunities. Like when internships, and Anthony touched on this as well, like internships are a really good way to do it. If you're studying engineering, we've got our compulsory work experience that you need to do in order to graduate. But I would also recommend, depending on what uni you're at, a lot of them have industry-based projects. And I have had some fabulous interns over the years and fabulous projects where you get them in undergrad. It's usually fourth year, and it can be a 6 or 12-month project, and it's embedded in industry, and you get a specific project that you're responsible for. And it gets you a taster of the business, which you may or may not like, but all lessons learned are good ones. But it also gives you a project that you can put on your resume as well. So I would be pushing for work experience and pushing for industry-based projects. The ecosystem is strong and it's growing in every state in Australia. So get out there and get into industry as best you can. But I'm sure Anthony actually has some good guidance on this one too.
Yeah, like I completely agree with that. We have 20-week placement students, and we have 12-week placement students from different universities. So they come and do an internship. I have people ringing me up for work experience for summer holidays, and a lot of that is a bit opportunistic. There's only so many people we can take. But the honours projects is a very interesting pathway because and most industries will be the same as us, I imagine. There is a heap of stuff that we'd love to do that we just simply don't have the time to do, or it's not a burning issue from our immediate focus, which is on revenue generating projects. But we'd love to have this work done. And if getting a focused industry sponsored project, and the sponsorship doesn't necessarily mean it's financial, but it might just be access to materials or expertise or data sets and things like that. And doing a industry focused project is a really good first step into your interview. That's the best way to describe it.
I think it's also good for students because it's hard for them to understand the businesses and the type of companies that are around. You know, joining industry groups, like, you know, even for things like Oz Biotech, who hold the, you know, these networking events, I think it's good for students to attend those events and to meet people in the industry. I think it's just a good opportunity. And even within the universities themselves, you know, they encourage networking events between industry people as well as students. So I think all of those help students get their, you know, getting them to meet and interact with industry people. And who knows, it could be your next boss.
Yeah, that's a good point, Johnathon. Most of them offer free membership to students. So Engineers Australia is the same. In Queensland, we've got Life Sciences Queensland, but there is Oz Biotech nationally. So looking at all of those membership-based organisations that provide free student membership and attending the networking events is really, really good advice.
Yeah. And when I said everything's overwhelming, I think what I meant was it's really good to you'll always be learning, and there's no replacement for experience. So I think, yeah, you've got to get out there. You've got to start learning. Everyone starts somewhere, but don't expect to know everything straight away because no one does, and it takes a long time. So I think that's everything. Oh, we do have one quick question from Jared. Just to finish up, so how do we attract the best graduates into the medtech sector? Is there something we can do? It's a tough question, but I think
it's a question. I have to say the graduates that I've taken on, we've got about maybe 12 now, have been exceptional people. I don't have, so if there are better graduates going somewhere else, I'll eat my hat.
Yeah, I'm with you. I think it's that core purpose driven. Like we in medtech, we are solving the world's problems. We're helping people. We're helping save lives. Like whatever it is you're doing in medtech, there's always a really core purpose. And as individuals and humans, we're all driven by a level of purpose. So I agree. I think we generally attract the best bright minds because they're purpose-driven individuals who want to make a difference, and we can actually deliver against that in this sector. So I haven't had any challenges either.
Do you think there's perhaps that people outside of our sector don't realise how many companies there are and how many opportunities?
I think it's interesting because we're all mechanical engineers and biomedical, you're attracting people from other sectors. I was in the steel industry and loved it, but then I got attracted into medical because of the purpose. So I think it pulls people from other industries, and I don't know about whether there's a perception there's not a lot of opportunity, because COVID has put that at the front and central with what our requirements are for sovereign capability in medtech and pharmaceuticals. So I think people know. Would be my guess.
I think COVID, I think you're right. I think COVID's probably been pretty good for our sector. And I think that there's a whole load of companies that really jumped at opportunities to try and help out. But also, I think I sometimes think we should look at health, at medtech, more similar to defense, where we're happy to fund defense projects that keep our capabilities within Australia. We don't think about that with any other sector, but I think with medical devices, we really should be we should see it as such a key capability that we have within our borders that we should encourage it.
I think the government is changing its mindset on sovereign capability outside of missiles and guns. So there is investment now being made with the Modern Manufacturing Initiative, etc. And there's many, MRFF funding, which we've been fortunate to receive as well. I find that most of the graduates that I interview, they've gone into engineering like most of us fall into engineering because we were quite good at maths and physics at school, maybe a bit of chemistry, and weren't quite sure. You either like electricity or you don't, so that dictates whether you're a mechanical or electronics engineer. And then eventually, and you just fall in love with engineering generally, your skills are quite transferable across industry sectors. I've jumped several industry sectors in my career. As you get more experience, you become more specialised because you obviously build up a deep entrenched set of knowledge of the field that you're working in, particularly in medical devices, the whole quality system. They keep us on our toes because it keeps changing. But a lot of the graduates, especially the biomeds or the people that have really expressed an interest to come and work for us, are driven by the fact that they would love to, maybe wanted to be a doctor or a nurse or something like that, but they decided medicine wasn't the career for them. But in engineering, in medtech, they can actually develop solutions that help many, many people. And that's a consistent theme that I see. So it does take that sort of person, I think, that they really care that what they're actually working on is going to have net benefit to humanity.
Great. I think that's a really good place to finish then. Thanks again, everyone. It's been really great talking to you. I think it's a really good subject. I think we've had lots of really good engagement, so lots of really good interest from people on the questions as well. Please, everyone watching, if you want to get in touch with anyone, feel free. We're happy to help connect you. If you're interested in the medical device partnering program, get in touch with us as well. And yeah, just finally, thanks everyone for watching, and thanks to all of the panelists. It was great to chat to you today.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks. Bye.
Bye.